Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to an exciting edition of the SPSSI Grad Student Committee's Policy Webinar Series. I'm Angela Robinson, and I'm the chair of SPSSI's Grad Student Committee, and I will be facilitating today's event. Today, we are lucky to be hearing from Maya Goodbole, who's a PhD student at the City University of New York Graduate Center, and Priyadarshini Sandanapiche, who is a research associate at Rutgers University. Before I turn it over to Priya and Maya, I have a few notes about procedure. For those of you who are less familiar with SPSSI, I'll also give a brief overview of our organization and highlight some of the opportunities that we offer as well. So with respect to procedure, to avoid noise interference, all attendees are in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. But we know that you will likely have comments and questions, and we're definitely excited to have an interactive Q&A segment after Maya and Priya's presentation today. So we ask that you pose your questions in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, and I will organize those and deliver them to Priya and Maya once we get to the Q&A portion. We'll also be joined at that time by David Livert, who leads SPSSI's UN team, to join in the Q&A as well. And just lastly, the presentation, which includes both the slides and a recording of the webinar, will be available to attendees shortly after today's session via SPSSI's YouTube channel. You can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to briefly share a little bit about SPSSI as an organization and about the opportunities we offer for our members. SPSSI was founded in 1936 and is now a group of over 3,000 scientists and researchers who share a common interest in research on the psychological aspects of important social and policy issues. As an organization, we aim to bring theory and practice into focus on human problems of the group, the community, and nations, as well as issues that defy national boundaries. Though an independent society, SPSSI is also Division 9 of the APA and an organizational affiliate of APS. We welcome the membership of anyone interested in the society. Next slide, please. As an organization, SPSSI offers its members a wide variety of opportunities for graduate students. Our summer conference is coming up this June in San Diego, and SPSSI also offers a number of networking opportunities, conferences, awards, and fellowships for graduate students as well. We have a very active grad student committee, and elections for officer positions are coming up this spring, so we hope you'll consider running for an open role. Our committee facilitates activities like this policy webinar series. We also have a methodology webinar series, a diversity pre-conference, writing opportunities for our grad student newsletter, and more. And all of these aim to support grad students in their scholarly and policy-related pursuits. Next slide. For more information about SPSSI, you can visit our website, spssi.org, and check out our YouTube channel for a recording of today's event, as well as previous webinars. If you're interested in presenting on an upcoming webinar, there's an email address on this slide for Nuha Al-Shabani, who's a member of our grad student committee, and please contact her if you would like to join Priya and Maya in our list of very high quality presenters for our webinar series. Next slide, please. And so now I'd like to formally introduce today's speakers. So Maya Goodbole is a fourth-year doctoral student in the Basic and Applied Social Psychology program at CUNY Graduate Center and a current intern with the SPSSI NGO team. Maya's research focuses around understanding and intervening against factors that contribute to disparities in the representation and achievement of women in competitive contexts such as leadership. She is particularly interested in using social psychological research to inform policy and practice within organizations. She's currently investigating how sex discrimination policy statements can impact women's motivation, achievement, and perceptions of organizational climate. Priyadarshini Sandanapiche recently graduated with a master's in clinical and counseling psychology from William Patterson University. She's currently working as a research associate at the Francois Xavier Bagnoud Center of Rutgers University, Newark. Her work at FXB Center focuses on HIV prevention in sexual minority populations. Specifically, her studies examine different components involved in the context of HIV/AIDS, such as mental health, substance abuse, biomedical prevention, and mobile health, with an emphasis on social determinants of health and health disparities reduction. Her primary responsibilities include providing research-based counseling protocols, preparing documents such as publications, grant writing, literature reviews, and IRB-related items, research tool preparation and dissemination to participants, data management and analyses. Priya and Maya, you can you can skip ahead to your slides for today's presentation. Today, Priya and Maya are going to be talking about the role of SPSSI's UN team. The teams work in support of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals with a focus on goal number 5, which is gender equality, and ways in which graduate students can get involved in this type of work. And then, as I mentioned before, during the Q&A portion, they'll be joined by SPSSI representative to the United Nations, David Livert, who's also a professor at Penn State University. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Priya and Maya. Thank you both for being here today.
Great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. So as Angela mentioned, today we're going to be talking about how to integrate the United Nations into your graduate school experience. Both Priya and I are interns with the SPSSI UN team. We've been working on the team since about August, September. So we're just having a really lovely time learning about the UN and getting involved in many different ways. So today we're going to first talk about the United Nations, what it is and what is the structure of the United Nations. Then we're going to talk about ECOSOC-Accredited NGOs, which is what SPSSI is, and how that works and what opportunities we have as an accredited NGO. We're going to introduce you briefly to the SPSSI UN NGO team and activities that we've been involved in and events we've put on recently. We're also going to introduce you to the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the UN framework for kind of structuring their goals for sustainability at this present moment. And we're going to talk about how psychological research can contribute towards this goal development and progress. We'll also present some stuff on past and upcoming events organized by the SPSSI team. We have some really exciting stuff coming up that we would love to share with you guys. And finally, we're going to talk about how grad students can really get involved in these pieces of international issues and sustainability and peacekeeping. Okay, so what's the United Nations? The UN is an intergovernmental organization that was essentially tasked to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, and achieve international cooperation to really be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. And it was founded, the charter was signed in 1945, just after World War II. It was actually signed in San Francisco. So the mission and the work that the UN does are all determined by the charter, which was established at this time. The organization is really interested in maintaining international peace and security, as I mentioned, protecting human rights, delivering humanitarian aid, promoting sustainable development, and upholding international law. So here are some examples that they really focus on, including climate change, human rights, disarmament, terrorism, humanitarian and health emergencies, gender equality, governance, food production, and more. So this is a pretty wide umbrella, and the United Nations deals with all these issues globally. There's 3 key groups, people that you might meet at the United Nations. The first is member nations. These are member states, the countries that participate within the United Nations. There's presently 193 countries that are represented within the United Nations. There's also the United Nations staff and agency, which are the administrative bodies of the UN. And finally, NGOs, groups like us that are affiliated with the United Nations in various ways. When the UN was conceptualized back in 1945, they really thought about it in terms of these organs. This is equivalent to a department, for example. So there's 6 primary organizations that the UN is structured under. The first is the General Assembly. This might be what you think of when you think about the United Nations. It is the major deliberative body of the United Nations, and it's comprised of all 193 of those member states. So each member state in this organization has equal representation, and they make decisions about the budget, for example. They make recommendations based on the General Assembly resolutions and so on. Then there's the Security Council, which is tasked with international peace and security. So that's comprised of 5 permanent members. That's China, the US, the UK, Russia, and France. So this was established right after World War II, so those permanent members kind of reflect the power structures in that time and who sort of won that World War II. So in addition, there's 10 rotating member states from other parts of the world that are able to join this department on a rotating basis. So they have 2-year appointments to get representation from other countries as well. Then there's the Secretariat, which is the administrative body that works closely with the Secretary General. There's the International Court of Justice that deals with international law violations and so on. And then there's this Trusteeship Council, which was initially established to ensure that trust territories after World War II were looked after in terms of the best interests of their residents. It was suspended in 1994 and is currently inactive because all of the countries had gained independence as of that point. So it's technically still an organ and could be reactivated, but it's currently dormant at this point. And so the land that we kind of live in is the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. That deals with economic and social issues as evidenced by the name, and it's primarily concerned with helping developing nations to promote the rights of all, and it's made up of several commissions. So here's an example of the 8 functional commissions that make up the Economic and Social Council. Commission for Social Development, Commission on the Status of Women, Population and Drugs, Population and Development, excuse me, Narcotic Drugs, Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, Science and Tech for Development, the Statistical Commission, and the United Nations Forum on Forests. So these are the 8 functional commissions, but there's also other things like expert bodies, including the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and then there's also regional committees that form ECOSOC as well, like the Economic Commission for Africa, etc. So each of these 8 functional commissions, they usually have a meeting during the year in which they all convene and talk about the issues that are prioritized for that year that are based in the UN goals and the frameworks that they've set forth. So for example, the 57th session of the Commission for Social Development, that just happened back in February. And then currently happening right now is CSW 63, that's the Commission on the Status of Women. It's occurring until March 22nd, and we have a parallel event during this that we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. And then another event is the High Level Political Forum, in which this is actually organized by the General Assembly and ECOSOC, but they talk about their goals for sustainable development and talk about the progress and the steps moving forward to get the full, to achieve more progress in these domains. So we are an ECOSOC-Accredited NGO. So this provides NGOs with access to not only ECOSOC, but also to its many subsidiary bodies, to the various human rights mechanisms of the United Nations, etc. So we have lots of opportunities to be heard and to be contributing to work at the United Nations. One example is that we're able to attend international conferences and events that are held by the United Nations. We can go to special events organized by the President of the General Assembly. We can go to NGO-specific meetings, and we have ground passes for anything that occurs at the United Nations as well that we have access to. Another thing that we're able to do is make written and oral statements at these events. So any of those commission events that I spoke about previously, we're allowed to integrate, write up a written or oral statement to include in their official documents for the event. So we might, for example, write a statement about how psychological science can contribute to a specific issue. That's the focus of that year's session. We're also able to organize side events during these commissions as well. There's other NGO committees that work on establishing their own side events. So we're able to participate with those NGO committees to organize side events, parallel events that occur simultaneously with the big commission meetings. So here are some examples of active NGO committees. These are things that our members are directly involved in, particularly the Commission on Social Development, Commission on the Status of Women, the Committee on Sustainable Development, Mental Health, Migration, education as well. So a lot of our members go to these monthly meetings, which is a collection of NGO members who come and share information, listen to talks, etc., and then also organize those side events during the big commission meetings.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to start off with our SPSSI NGO team. So it consists of So Dr. David Lillard, who is online right now, so he may answer any questions at the end, who's also our main representative. And we have Dr. Rachel Revich, Dr. Peter Walker, Dr. Koran Okarudu, Dr. Joseph De Meyer, Dr. Harold Cook, and me and Maya are the current interns of this academic year. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about the PCUN, which is also like as an interns of SPSSI, we would attend meetings of the PCUN, which is the psychology coalitions at the United Nations. So which is basically composed of representatives of psychology and psychology related organizations that are NGOs accredited at the UN. And also they may be affiliated with the UN departments, agencies, and the missions. So one of the goals of the PCUN is to kind of collaborate in the application of psychological principles, science, and practice to global challenges of the UN agenda. And also the PCUN members seeks to accomplish this overarching aim through advocacy, research, education, and policy and program development guided by psychological knowledge and perspectives to promote human dignity, human rights, decent work, psychosocial well-being, and positive mental health. So on your right, you'll be able to see the PCUN member, the list of the organizations. You could see the APA, the American Psychological Association. There's also Association for Trauma Outreach and Prevention, which is the ACHOP. Then you have like the European Health Psychology Society, Institute of Multicultural Counseling and Education Services, and even SPSSI is part of the PCUN, which is Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues. Then we have a World Council for Psychotherapy and World Federation for Mental Health. So all of these organizations come together to kind of reaching these goals. So one of the main the task of being part of the United Nations or just being accredited to ECOSOC, one opportunity that you have, which Maya talked about, is kind of able to propose statements. So you're seeing right now, it's about a statement that is actually proposed by PCUN, which is on the importance of psychosocial resilience and mental health well-being in humanitarian crisis, which is proposed at the World Humanitarian Summit in Turkey. So it's basically to kind of proposing the United Nations to include the mental health as part of the health in general when they talk about any kind of reports. So it's they kind of emphasize the importance of talking about mental health when we talk about health in general. So like there's also you see a link downstairs and you'll be able to look into the other statement that is actually proposed by the PCUN. And also another important task of being part of PCUN is to they organize the Psychology Day. So it's been it started in 2007, and every year they kind of focus on a specific theme, and they kind of organize at the United Nations. So you could see in 2015 it's about health inequalities, and in 2016 it was about focusing on resilience, and last year it was about the climate change, which is on psychological interventions, promoting mitigation and adaptations. And this year it's going to be coming soon on April, and which is focuses on the gender equality on the topic of the time is now, psychological contributions to gender equality. And also sustainable development goals. This is one of the most often topic within United Nations. You would come across this term in any kind of the UN reports or projects, activities that they are kind of organizing. So what's this all about? So it's actually a 2030 agenda for sustainable development adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015. It kind of provides you a blueprint for peace and prosperity while achieving a better and more sustainable future for all. So SDGs consists of 17 major global challenges that we face, and it urges all countries, including developed and developing, to take actions in a global partnership. So one of the major thing about this SDG is that all the goals are interconnected, and they kind of emphasize the fact that they recognize that ending poverty and other deprivation must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reducing inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and environmental protection. So this is like a very summarized picture of all the goals presented in one screen. So you could see the SDG goal number 1, which is no poverty. The second goal is zero hunger. The third, good health and well-being. The mental health comes under this particular goal. We also have quality education, gender equality, and also goal 13, the climate action, which is the highest priority of the United Nations right now. And we also have peace and justice and strong institutions, goal 16, and goal 17 is partnerships for the goals. So how this kind of works, like, so what's this all about? Why do we have these goals? So basically they have these 17 sustainable development goals, and there are 169 targets in all of these goals. So each sustainable goal comes with its own targets and indicators. For an instance, you could there is Sustainable Development Goal 3, which ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. So one of the particular target under this goal is 3.4, which is about by 2030, reduce by 1/3 premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention and treatment, and promote mental health and well-being. So how do we measure the target? So that's how the indicators come in. So one of the indicators of this particular target is to measure the mortality rate attributed to cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetics, or chronic respiratory diseases. The other indicator would be measuring the suicide mortality rate. So one of the big questions that everybody asks is like, so what psychology has to do with all of these goals? Because you see the terms poverty, hunger, education. So where does psychology fit in all of these goals? So this is like one of the quote that I took from one of the conferences of the speaker. Psychology is stereotypically seen as being about mental health. Little is known about by the general public about other branches of psychology, such as behavioral science, and how its use can encourage better choices and decision making in line with sustainable development. So psychology is an evidence-based social science which can be applied in different aspects of sustainable development goals, from disaster relief and psychological resilience building in the wake of disasters, and also kind of build conflict resolution skills to trauma interventions and peace buildings within group. So psychology plays a very important role in terms of how we can use the psychological principles in all of these goals in some ways. And also it can be an indicator in terms of how do we achieve this development. So one of the biggest indicator in the SDG goals is the health or well-being of the individuals, which kind of indicates a good social and economic development of a country and also a global as a whole. So psychology can help to shape social policies that foster mental health and overall well-being of individuals.
So we also want to talk a little bit about SDG 5 in particular, because we have 2 events coming up this year. We have a parallel event at the Commission on the Status of Women next week, and we also have our UN Psychology Day later in April, which both kind of deal with Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is to achieve gender equality and to empower all women and girls. As Priya mentioned, I have a list of some of the targets here, as well as the indicators that measure the progress of a given target. For example, target 5.1 is to end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere. So what the UN has set as a measure of that progress is whether or not legal frameworks are in place to promote, enforce, and monitor equality and non-discrimination on the basis of sex. So they have these for a series of targets, and where we have developed our events is really centering around target 5.5. This is also one of the priority themes for the current Commission on the Status of Women. So that's to ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making in political, economic, and public life. So the UN's indicators of progress on this goal are the proportion of seats held by women in national parliaments and local governments, as well as the proportion of women in managerial positions. So since they conceptualized these targets, they've assessed progress on them, and this is where we are right now in terms of those 2 measures on women in leadership. So for example, in 2000, the proportion of women in national parliaments was 13.2%, and then in 2017, it's gone up to 23.7%. In management, it's still about less than 1/3% of women are senior and middle management positions. So women do remain underrepresented in these domains, and we're really far from that 50-50 parity that we should be seeing. But the promising thing is that 39% of countries worldwide have used a quota system to increase women's representation in politics, and 47% of world business leaders say they would be in favor of gender quotas on corporate boards. So we know that women's and girls' empowerment is essential to expand economic growth and to promote social development. And the full participation of women in these labor forces would add percentage points to national growth, to GDP, et cetera. So it's really crucial that we continue to push for women to be involved in these particular domains. So we are hosting a parallel event at CSW next Tuesday from 6:15 to 7:45 at the Church Center for the United Nations. We were framing our event under this particular goal, thinking about women in leadership, and we have come up with a panel to discuss psychosocial factors that really can promote the participation and achievement of women in leadership and decision making. So we're very familiar with the problems that face women. We'll briefly talk about the biases that occur for women in leadership, including gender stereotypes and discrimination. But where we really want to focus is how we can begin to intervene against some of those processes that we see on this global stage and decrease the global gender gap. So, for example, we'll present evidence of these best practices that can help empower women. We'll present strategies for human resources, as well as any kind of social justice frameworks that we can apply within academia and leadership in general. So here's a flyer for the event, and if you're interested afterwards, we can disseminate this. For people who live in the New York City area or able to come, we do invite you to please come. And if you can't come, we actually will have it live webcast on the SPSSI Facebook page, so you can follow it there as well. So our panel, we've got Dr. Maureen O'Connor, who's the president at Palo Alto University, and she's going to be talking about how we can apply social justice principles to mentoring in the academy, how that can extend to empowering women's leadership in the academy, as well as more generally. We also have Ms. Tama Vayal, who's going to be speaking about issues that women face in the workplace. We'll also talk about elements of human resources and what they're doing to foster fair opportunities for women right now. And then we also have Dr. Teresa Vecchio, who's a professor of psychology, and we'll also be talking about similar gender dynamics and women in leadership. I'll be moderating the session, and then Dr. Rachel Ravish and Dr. David Levert will be doing the co-chairing. We also have our 12th annual Psychology Day coming up soon, which also falls under these goals outlined by SDG number 5. So our theme for that is The Time Is Now, Psychological Contributions to Gender Equality. We're working on this in tandem with the members of PCUN, APA, PSYOP, etc. And we're going to have experts in the field of psychology similarly address the challenges in achieving that global equity. So we're going to, again, highlight strategies and programs that encourage, support, and create conditions to accelerate progress towards making this a global reality. So as interns, we've also been able to participate in different subcommittees that work on registration programs, publicity, fundraising, and finance. We've got to be directly involved in picking speakers for the event, coming up with the name. We have monthly meetings to all get together and really share information and resources and plan this event together. So here's the details for this as well. This will be Thursday, April 25th from 3 to 6 p.m. in the United Nations headquarters. So when you register, you'll get a badge for that day and pass to the actual UN headquarters. Here's a flyer for that event. This will also be live cast, by the way, I think. We'll follow up on that. But we have some really great psychology speakers as well, including Dr. Comas Diaz, Dr. Espin, Dr. Grabe, and Dr. Shine. So they'll all be featured on that day.
Okay, so another one of the interesting events that we attended last year was about the International Day of Older Persons celebrations. So basically, as the interns, we got to like kind of help in the organization that particular day. So which basically it was about to kind of reaffirm the commitment to promoting the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all the persons. It was actually held on the 2nd of October last year at the ECOSOC Chamber of United Nations headquarters. Another interesting event, which I was really excited about, was the SPSSI Advocacy Day, which just happened like January 31st. So SPSSI organized this like with a theme on protecting and promoting the human rights of scientists, scholars, and students around the world, because there is a very urgent need to kind of focus on these particular issues, because there are attacks on scientists, scholars, and students, and their institutions harm not only the individuals and institutions directly targeted. So SPSSI kind of identified the importance of kind of the threat kind of made to the higher education and institutions in general, and they want to kind of bring awareness about it. So as the SPSSI team, we visited the Capitol Hill to advocate the rights of scientists, scholars, and students around the world to the Senate and congressmen to learn more about this issue. So there's basically going to be a congressional briefing on this coming 22nd that SPSSI is hosting with other scientific and human rights organizations. So this is some of the colorful pictures that we took that day. It was like a very, very cold day, but it was still enjoyed. So you could see on the left corners the entire team just in front of the Capitol Hill in the morning. We were struggling to take pictures somehow. And also you could see on the right corners like a small orientation. So we kind of spent our morning in the SPSSI's building to kind of to understand, okay, what exactly we have to do, like what are the things, do's and don'ts we can do in the Capitol Hill. It's kind of like a small orientation, and you could see the down. So basically, SPSSI kind of pulled out all its members and committees, the interns, to kind of represent each state, and we would be able to go and meet our particular representative. So me, I represented New Jersey, and like Maya represented New York State. So I was able to go and meet the legislative assistants of New Jersey State, like Senator Cory Booker, and also the other congressmen, the two congressmen, and it was a very fun day. And also it was very, very interesting to see the policy aspect of it. And another event that is coming up that we are trying to we are organizing is on gender equality and climate action, bringing psychology to the United Nations at the SPSSI conference. So it's basically going to be an interactive discussions, which is going to be led by Dr. David Lever and then Maya and I. So we are trying to provide a brief overview of the SDGs and the work that SPSSI members are presently doing, what we are currently doing, to another set of audience. And also we are mainly focusing on how we can translate psychological concepts into the UN's global agenda with a focus on climate action, education, and gender equality. As you can see, we are kind of pulling out three main SDG goals here. And also we are trying to use the key principles from psychology that we will discuss how women are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and identify strategies to increase women's and girls' participation, leadership, and access to education and decision making in areas of sustainable development. And also we would like to kind of involve in global efforts for gender equality and a healthier planet. And then this is another database that we are currently working on, and as an intern. So this is a kind of just to kind of identify experts who can help provide research to aid team in development of side events and written statements for various UN events. So as I've talked about, there are a lot of goals in SDG goals that focus on different social issues. So this SDG database kind of provides a platform to pull all those experts. So if we want to kind of propose a side event or like make a statement or make any necessary changes regarding a social issues, we would be able to contact that particular expert who's already actively involved in research in all these areas. They would be able to help us. So it's one of the important tasks that we are currently doing right now.
So finally, we wanted to end with ways that grad students can get involved, and this was the real crux of our presentation and what we wanted to share with you today. The first thing is you can apply for the SPSSI UN NGO internship. I think Dr. Lippert can speak to this directly during questions and answers, but I think the call for interns usually goes out in April or May for the following year. So you can look out for that. It usually gets distributed through the traditional SPSSI channels. So you can apply for that and join our team and help with all these events that we've talked about. work on proposing side events and issuing statements. And there are several things you can get involved with, including the UN youth initiatives as well. They have a big youth community that is a separate thing, but you could get involved as an NGO affiliated intern. The next thing that you can do is attend any UN NGO SPSSI events that focus on different areas of sustainable development. So following our website, we're working on getting that revamped. Keep in touch about the events that we're doing. And the good thing is that if you're not in New York City, live stream is available for many events at the web.tv.un.org. So not only our SPSSI events, but also anything that's done at the United Nations. If you want to, for example, see the President of the General Assembly or the Secretary General speak, you're able to actually tune into those events, which is it's really cool to see. And if you are in the New York City area, you can swing by our events. You can get a pass to go see the United Nations, and we can really introduce you to what that experience is like. Another thing that you can do is explore UN resources at the UN library, the Dag Hammarskjöld Library. What's really cool about that is there's a lot of online materials. So if you're interested in sustainable development, who's involved, the current progress, how we measure those targets and indicators, you can really get all of that information here at the library. It should be accessible to everyone online. And the last thing, not the last thing, but another thing is to explore your research interests within the SDG framework. So using that to guide your interests, your research, what you're doing at the time, and understanding how your research can contribute to these global goals set forward by the United Nations.
So along that line, you can also share if you have already have like any research or information relevant to SDG goals. So we were talking about the statements and how you can make use of this evidence-based research that you already have to make or like to propose a policies change to the United Nations, because that's a very big part of it. So if you have any research related to education, or it can be mental health, or it can be like any relevant topic that is coming under the SDGs, it would be very useful for you to kind of share that information with a SPSSI UN team. And also another main focus of the United Nations in general is the advocacy perspective. So just even if you, as a graduate student, you have a lot of opportunities to kind of advocate on what you are interested in. So getting involved in the advocacy by urging local, state, and federal officials to develop policies related to sustainability. So basically, you can get into the UN website. There are a lot of issues that they focus on. So you can just sign in and write a letter to your particular Congress, wherever you are, like to that particular state, represent a particular congressman. So you can write a statement or like a letter, like making them to kind of be aware about this issue. It can be about anything, like if you are very interested in about child protection, you can write a statement regarding that, or you can just bring awareness to the people who are actually in authority position. So advocacy is a very big thing in the United Nations, and you could be easily part of that like a program in the United Nations. And also one of the last thing that we would like to say is to get the word out on your campus about SDGs and other global issues, because it's something it's like a very big priority right now, and we are talking about like major things happening around us, like climate change and everything. And I think it's very important for us to kind of bring awareness being in this field, especially being in the United Nations. We are talking about not just the United States, but like the people around the world and everybody. So it's very important for us to, I think we have the responsibility to kind of like talk about these issues and bring awareness to make necessary changes as soon as possible. So I think this is kind of like the tips that we have so far. Yeah. So, yes.
I think that's it for our presentation. So we're open to questions, depending on how you guys handle that.
Can you put the video?
Oh, yeah.
This is Sarah. I don't know if Angela is going to jump on, but I can fill in the meanwhile with some questions.
Yeah.
The first is, what is a typical day as a UN intern? What is the commitment like as a grad student? Is it easy to balance with grad work?
It's a really good question. I'll start. I think it really is what you want to make out of it. There's a lot of opportunities for you to get involved. So for example, just a general kind of expectation is that you come to our SPSSI meetings once a month. So that's usually on the first Thursday of the month. Thursday is the UN day. That's the day that all meetings occur. I'm not sure why, but it's Thursdays. So you definitely want to have your schedule cleared for Thursdays. So SPSSI meets on the first Monday for about 2 hours each month. And then PCUN and the Psychology Day Committee, if you want to be involved with those things, also meets on the third, I believe the third Thursday of each month. So that's just the meetings that you have. On top of that, we have side projects, for example, the SDG Database that we do on our own whenever we have time. You can also get involved in developing these side events. That was something that was really exciting for me this year, is to be able to submit the proposal and get it accepted and then start to plan everything. So that has been a significant time commitment. But what I will say is that it doesn't necessarily stand apart from my grad work. Well, I do work on women's leadership issues, so this is something that directly contributes to my CV. It helps me explore an area of research that I'm already doing in grad school, so it supplements it versus kind of fractures my time, if that makes sense.
I think for me, it's kind of totally opposite. I'm working for a different entirely research focus, like on a different topic. But I would say the time commitment wise, I mean, we didn't have like much of issues apart from like if there's events coming up, like there's a bit of like a more rush in terms of making proposals, the abstract, like organizing the events wise. But other than that, it's all about your interest. Like it's a very great opportunity to be a part of. Like you can make use of most of that opportunity. So the time commitment wise, I think it's all up to you if you're really interested. I think dedicating a bit of your time beside your grad school, it's really worth it. So yes.
Thank you. Another question we received is, have you been able to pursue any of your personal research goals within this structure, and has that produced meaningful change?
That's a really great question. I have been able to pursue the goals, and as I mentioned, I'm really interested in gender issues and how to increase the participation of women across these competitive domains. So for me, more than also contributing to my research, it's just given me an entirely new perspective on the way I study things. For example, I realized my bias was to look at it through this very Western framework, or look at it through these private sector framework and organizations, but it's really opened me up to understanding how can we create more universal solutions, and how can we think globally to identify the problems, and just really, it's changed my frame of reference for how I do my work. So I think it's definitely, I've been able to explore my work through it, but it's also just kind of changed the way I view my research, which I find to be really, really helpful. It's given me a very unique perspective, which I think is super valuable.
For me, I would say when I joined the team, I didn't have like my own personal research or goals that I want to focus. I know Maya was very interested, as she said, like women and leadership. So she had the opportunity to kind of like develop on it. But for me, it was all about something very new. So I was just ready to expose any kind of research or goals that is already like developing the side events. So I'm right now kind of like, oh, okay, this is how like the women and the leadership part of it kind of works. Or when talking about the climate change or anything. So it kind of like, even if you have a goal or not, I think this exposure will help you to even come up with your own research goals, with time. And I think that's very useful.
Yeah, and also to kind of tag on that, there's these research goals, but there's also grad student goals where we want to amp up our CV and we want to have all these exciting opportunities. So this has given me a lot of that as well, where I'm able to present at SPSSI and do an interactive discussion, or to have this parallel event on my CV, things like this webinar. So it's really, really great in terms of adding to your CV and really broadening it and creating just a nice picture.
Thank you. Our next question is from someone who is getting a PhD in social psychology with a specialization in peace. Would there be an opportunity to collaborate with the committees in the security department, or do students affiliated with SPSSI need to stay within the ECOSOC?
That's a really great question. I think that might be a good one for Dr. Levert too, if he's able.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Did you hear the question?
Could you repeat the specialization? It's getting a PhD in social psych. I wasn't sure of.
Sure, yeah. I will be getting a PhD in social psychology with a specialization in peace. Would there be an opportunity to collaborate with the committees in the security department, or do students affiliated with SPSSI need to stay within the ECOSOC?
So I would never say that we need to stay within ECOSOC, but it's difficult for NGOs in general to get involved with that side of the house. Although some of our members have sat in on Security Council meetings. This is one of the real advantages to having the grounds passes. You can explore and you can go join things you didn't think you could. I've sat in on a peacekeeper conference as well. We would have to investigate that because there is work that's being done. I don't know whether it's under the aegis of the Secretariat or bodies underneath the Security Council. I would say that there are a number of activities in the ECOSOC universe, the NGO universe, that has to do with peace and conflict. So you would find a lot of other people engaged and very excited about it. So that's all I know.
I have another question about kind of the application process and some other related pieces of information. So what is the process for applying to be a UN SPSSI representative or intern? Are there any financial resources available for the intern to support their time?
I can take this one rather quickly. We have a call for interns in the spring, so if you get SPSSI email and learned about this conference, you'll see that as well. We typically request a CV, a writing sample, some references. Unfortunately, it's not a paid internship. Wish we could. However, we do defray some expenses, some travel expenses. If you are presenting, there are a few free meals we're able to provide here and there. So it's not a paid internship, but it's an internship where you have a lot of autonomy and flexibility aside from some Thursdays, and you can make of it what you want to. And you will meet so many people that you never thought you would meet in terms of both UN staff and other psychologists and other people involved in other areas. You know, we have to pause when we go to the UN and interact with the great universe, the great community there, and realize that we're the evidence-based people, and there are lots of other NGOs and members of civil society interested in other approaches, faith-based approaches, and other approaches to dealing with the world's problems. And so you learn to share a language and to share a table and ways that we can pursue the same sorts of goals. It's a tremendous experience.
I have a related question from another person on the webinar. In your experiences, how do you see psychological science playing out at the UN? How are they working to achieve their goals using psychological science? And what are some of the challenges and barriers to implementing psychological science in an organization like the UN?
Would the interns like, I think we can all answer it, would the interns like to take a few moments?
Yeah. I can take a stab at some of those questions. So one thing that is a barrier is kind of communicating the importance of psychological science to this group. As David mentioned, it can be a lot of faith-based people. There's also these uphill kind of battles we face with stereotypes about what psychology is. So for example, as Priya mentioned before, some people think psychology is just mental health. That's really this picture is like, you know, they might not understand why they need a mental health specialist coming on board. To that, what we can do is we can tell them, make it applicable to them. So for example, we identify their specific needs in the UN, for example, how to talk to people from different cultures, how to manage a work-life balance, how to do stress management. That's all stuff that we can really help them with. So to let them know that it's not just mental health, we have, though that kind of is adjacent, but we have these other really important tools that we can teach you that's going to help your day-to-day work at the UN. And another thing related is teaching them that psychology is a science. It's empirical based, it's driven, that we have these rigorous psychological methods that can provide really important potential strategies that would be effective in this space. One challenge that I've personally been struggling with is when we do psychology research, it's often on a micro level, or I think about it in terms of interpersonal group dynamics, maybe even organizational. But then the UN is working on this totally macro sphere of policies and governments and that sort of stuff. So one challenge is to kind of take our research and move it up to this macro level and to kind of bridge the gap between those two things. Do you have anything to add?
I think you have covered almost all the questions. Yeah, the one of the biggest barrier is, as she said, it's all about kind of bringing awareness about the psychological science to the UN, because they really believe it's like a very confined, like a small portion, but then there's a whole big branch behind psychology, from industrial to educational, where you can use any principles into like any kind of SDG goals that there is out there. So I think that's it from my part.
I agree with you absolutely. One of the members of our team is an environmental psychologist, and he's kept very busy by the major focus right now on climate change and building resilience and managing risk involved in climate change. Yeah, it's a continual challenge to expand cognitive frameworks regarding what psychology is and where it comes into play. But for, you know, for everyone on this webcast, I would imagine you're thinking about these issues as well. You're interested in SPSSI, you're interested in social problems, and you know, you're just going to get more practice in understanding how to translate you know, good science into evidence that can really impact policy. So at least that's the way I've followed it.
Another question we received, we've been getting a ton of questions, by the way. Have you gained access to any international contexts where you can conduct future research or do future work because of your work with the UN committee?
Yes. You come into through the PCUN, through the coalition of psychological NGOs, we have several NGOs that are European or international. And you know, for example, I haven't personally said, hey, is there anyone who could collaborate on this? But very, very easily, could you do that? And interns could as well, or you know, anyone who's, you know, a SPSSI grad student who comes to New York, wants to come with us to a meeting, says, I'd really like to, you know, focus in this nation. We can see who we know. So I haven't done it, but it's absolutely possible.
Another question we received is, what is your relationship like with other members of the committee, the representatives, as an intern? How do you relate to them, and how do you work with them?
You go first.
Okay.
Think about that.
Okay, it's very, very Fantastic. Like I'm just gonna say like all the positive. I think we have only had like very positive relationship with the members. So we kind of meet most of the times every first Thursday and the third Thursday of the month, and everybody comes with a very different perspective, and they are like exposed in different fields. So being intern, like who are just the beginners of this career, it kind of really helped us to kind of have, oh, this is how it happens in the field. They kind of guide us, they kind of help us in, so these are the things that you can do. So there are a lot of guidance from our team members, and especially like, you know, as David also mentioned, there's one environmental psychology, and there's another person who talks like who's interested in the racial discrimination, and there's a health aspect, and there's education aspect. You're just kind of exposed to all of them and their ideas, and they're also very, very helpful in terms of if you need any resources, or like if you're like trying to do something, and you could easily kind of approach them and discuss about like if you have any interest regarding this. So they've been like fantastic throughout, like as far as I know, like, and I think it's sure of Maya too, and but they're very helpful, and we definitely have like a very, very positive relationship with all our team members. Yeah.
I agree, and it's very cool because you get to meet people, I think, as David mentioned, but you get to meet people you never really would have met in your spaces before. So everybody on our team has very different interests, people that I wouldn't have gotten to collaborate with and get to know, because they're slightly different in slightly different fields. And that goes also for people at PCUN, for example, people who are APA representatives or any kind of PSYOP representatives, for example. There's some really, really cool people, really kind of powerhouses in their fields as well. So you get to meet some really influential people in their fields, which is a really great opportunity. And they're also just really, really kind and open to working with you. So, for example, you participated in an event at the Eastern Psychological Association that was organized by APA.
I think it's the Council of the Family Committee.
Yeah, so it was a different committee, but she got kind of pulled into their family and got to do a talk with them, for example. So everyone's really open. You're not treated like an intern. Like, intern's the title, but it's not like we're running around doing photocopying, or it's really meaningful intellectual contributions. So, for example, with this side event, I got to just submit the proposal, and everyone's been really supportive in letting me kind of take the reins with that and to really shape it and craft it in an intellectual way. So I've been able to make it my own, and I've been given the independence and autonomy to really go in the direction that I wanted to with it. So overall, yes, very, very positive.
I think we have room for one more question, and that is, if you are outside of the New York City area, can you do the internship? And have you ever had interns who got outside funding to come and do the internship for a semester?
Question. David?
I don't know of any interns who've gotten outside funding. I know of an intern for another NGO who was absolutely terrific, who was also, she was an undergraduate, she had just finished, but she would be a future SPSSI member, I'm sure. She stayed with her family, or she stayed with some cousins in Manhattan for about 9 months, and she spent part of that time interning for another NGO. So that's possible. I don't know if there's funding available. It's for it, so we haven't had that. Our challenge and what we would like to do is to identify some great ways that folks who are outside of the area can participate. Obviously, if you come into the New York area at any point, let's get together and see if there's something we can take you to. But that's pretty, the idea of some distance participation, we're still formulating, and yes, I think so, in terms of assisting us with our database projects, in terms of maybe taking a particular area and attending digitally meetings and understanding the SDG around it. So for example, water rights, if you're interested in empowerment, gender, intersectionality, rural issues, and water rights and water technology, you know, we would love to have your participation from afar. So it's really something to raise with us. But it wouldn't be the same type of internship as Priya and Maya have, obviously. I also think we could consider, you know, some Zoom meetings and some meetings between members of our team and maybe graduate students in particular departments who might have an interest if you get together. we could also consider that. So I think there are a lot of possibilities, and that is absolutely a priority right now, is to formulate some great ways you can participate. So let us know. Just email us, please.
All right. And on that note, I think we're just about out of time. So I want to thank you all so much. Thank you to our awesome UN interns and David, who chairs our SPSSI UN committee. I'm Sarah Mancall, SPSSI's policy director, and I'll follow up by email with everyone who attended or registered to attend with links to all of the various things that were talked about today. And you can also then send any additional questions you have that we didn't have time to get to. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You want to?